Okay, so we're going to go over two of the best offer strategies that I've come across in Central New York. So the context for this video is that, and I'm sure any of you watching who are involved in Central New York real estate, it's an extremely competitive market that's very seller favorable. So just some big data. The rolling 12-month median days on market is 7. And then the median sales price is about 101% of the list price. So now every specific area of Central New York is going to be slightly different, and the months, each specific month is a little bit different based on the specific houses that got bought and sold in that month. But generally speaking, the context of this is that houses are selling extremely quickly, and it's just a really tough market for buyers. So many buyers are putting in like tens of offers before they finally get one accepted. So I've got two strategies that I've had some good luck with to get people under contract more quickly. Now in this market, it's pretty much impossible to like steal a house or get like a really, really good deal on it. The goal is just kind of to get under contract before the prices get even crazier, and to just buy it for a fair retail value. It's just about impossible to steal houses. You're just trying to not get taken advantage of the other way. So now as an aside, buying a house in this market is expensive. But also not buying a house has proven to be even more expensive. So just a quick anecdote, I had clients I was working with for over a year. It was like close to 18 months before they finally got under contract on a house. And they were looking in the $400,000 to $500,000 price range. And they were looking for over a year. They were paying rent that whole time. And so they were just very sensitive to overpaying, and they were very worried that the market was going to crash. And they were just very hesitant to be competitive with their offers. And so, as a result, during that year, the market went up like 11%. So on a $400,000 to $500,000 house that they were looking at when we started looking, that's now $440,000 to $550,000. So that's the cost of the houses went up like $50,000 while we were searching for houses, and they paid over $25,000 in rent that whole time. So kind of by being scared of being competitive and not being willing to put in really strong offers, it ended up costing them about $75,000 in a single year. So, I do get that it's scary to offer over asking, and it's scary to waive contingencies. And I don't have a crystal ball either, so anything could happen to prices in the future, but it's really just kind of a pick your pain type of situation. Cause, either you make a competitive offer and, maybe you don't feel great about the exact price you got it for. But it's either that or you're paying rent and prices are running right by you. So there's not really a way to win to win or lose. It's just a pick your pain. Are you going to be paying rent and letting house prices run away while you're not involved in it, or are you maybe going to have to overpay and waive a contingency you didn't want to, but you're under contract now, you own a house now. When that appreciation happens, you're the beneficiary of it. So anyway. The first strategy that we're going to talk about is kind of a standard multiple offer situation strategy. And this is going to be a strategy that's very common. A lot of agents are going to recommend structuring offers pretty similarly to this. And then my second one is a little bit more of a proprietary thing that I've been doing that I've had a lot of luck with. But let's just use a $200,000 house as an example. So if we've got a $200,000 house, we go and see it, we talk to the list agent, let's say they've got 4 offers currently, best and final is due at 8 p.m., something like that. So the way that we want to structure any multiple offer situation is going to be with an escalation clause. So the way an escalation clause works is I typically recommend just offering asking price, and then we're going to escalate up to whatever number you're comfortable with. So again, let's use that $200,000 as an example. So we're offering $200,000, and then we're saying we'll pay $2,000 above the next highest offer up to X. And then X is just whatever number you decide that you're comfortable paying. So the way I think about it when I'm trying to decide what the top of my escalation clause would be is I think about what is the number at which if someone outbids me, I'm not going to be upset about it. I'm going to say, you know what, more power to you. It's all yours. So I like to think of escalation clauses as an insurance policy against overpaying, because you're only paying slightly more than someone else was willing to pay. So when you don't do an escalation clause and you're just kind of trying to shoot in the dark at what you think a house is going to go for, you may offer $230 and the next highest offer was $212. Where it's like, well, if you'd done the escalation clause, you could have gotten it for $214, but instead you bid $230, or you put in your offer for $210 because you're scared about overpaying, but it goes for $230 and you would have been willing to pay $232. So that's why I like escalation clauses. Then just a couple caveats there. So let's say you were pre-approved up to 250. We saw a house that was 200 and we talked about it. We, ran a comparative market analysis and we said like around 230 is probably what we'd be comfortable paying for this house. So then we would structure it with we're going to pay $2,000 above the next highest offer up to $231,000. So I always pick weird numbers, so like 231 or 226 or 221. So that way, if someone else is also kind of thinking about 230 is what they'd be willing to pay, we'll have the tiebreaker because we'll be at 231. And then the other thing there is the escalation interval. So that 2,000 above the next highest offer that I was talking about. So the baseline is typically 1% of the purchase price. So, on $200,000, about 1% of that is going to be $2,000. So that's our typical escalation interval. Now there's a couple nuances there. So one of them is if you're a cash buyer. If you're a cash buyer, then you really just need to be slightly above the next highest offer because you already have the strongest financing. And so that's where we could just do 1,000 above the highest offer. Even if we're talking about a $750,000 house, where our escalation interval would typically be 7,500. In that case, we could just do 1,000 above the next highest offer because we just need to beat them out by a little bit. Our financing contingencies are as good as they can be. And then the opposite way would be if you're financing with FHA or VA, that's where you may want to increase that escalation interval. FHA and VA loans, I'll do a video coming up on the different types of loans and their pros and cons. They are a great loan product, but from the seller's perspective, there's an extra VA and FHA appraisal, which is just kind of another hoop that the buyers and the sellers have to jump through, and it's just one more thing that can go wrong. And so that's what sellers always want, just the fewest number of things that can go wrong, contingencies. And so with FHA and VA, there's just an extra thing that can go wrong. So think about it from the seller's perspective. If you had an offer that was $230,000 cash, and then our offer was $2,000 above, but it was FHA. So would you take $230 cash? It can close in 30 days. There's no bank involved at all. There's no contingencies there. Or $232,000 where the bank's involved. There's an FHA appraisal. We may have to get repairs done. We could get delayed. Is that difference in contingencies worth $2,000? Probably most sellers are going to pick the $230,000 cash. And that's where if you make your escalation interval more like $5,000, then you can overcome those couple of contingencies. So now, 230 cash versus 235 FHA is like, okay, well, now a lot of sellers are probably going to want that extra $5,000. So, okay, so once we've decided on our escalation clause terms, the next contingency to be thinking about is the inspection. So I don't ever tell buyers or recommend to buyers that they should or should not waive the inspection. It's really about your comfort level. So if you're very risk averse, or you're worried about this specific house for a specific reason, then by all means, we should include an inspection contingency. But just to throw some numbers out there, in my last 50-ish deals, really around 10% of them included home inspections. That's on the buy side or the sell side, and all of those were single offer situations. So again, I don't recommend waiving or not waiving home inspections, but it's just kind of the reality of the market that in a multiple offer situation, somebody is likely going to be willing to waive the inspection, and just the winning offer very likely did waive the inspection. So so again, I'm not, I don't tell buyers that they should or they should not. I'm just describing the reality of the market, which is, in a multiple offer situation, the winning bid likely waived the inspection. There's also a radon test as part of the standard Central New York contract. Now, this one, in my opinion, is not a good value for buyers. And that's for two reasons. One is that it extends the timeline where the sellers are like in limbo, right? So when you still have to overcome the home inspection and the radon contingencies, like you're under contract, you're not soliciting your house to any more buyers, but the deal could still fall apart. And that's where the radon is a particularly poor value. Because what happens is the radon test, they go in the basement, they put a charcoal disc down there, and then they leave. They come back 48 hours later, they retrieve the charcoal disc, they send it off to the lab gives them the results, they pass it on to us. And so it just ends up taking a long time. So we're just kind of sitting around twiddling our thumbs, like hoping everything's okay. And the sellers are kind of doing the same thing. And that whole time they could have been soliciting other offers from other buyers. So that's why the radon test is one that the sellers just typically don't like. And then from the buyer's perspective, the worst case scenario is that you do have radon and you have to install a mitigation system, which is typically around $1,000 to $1,500, right? So you're dramatically decreasing your probability that your offer gets accepted. We're adding time to the deal, and our worst case scenario is that we're spending $1,000 to $1,500 on a radon mitigation system, which in the grand scheme of home ownership is just not a hugely impactful amount of money, right? So it doesn't really change the value of the house, whether you have to install a $1,500 radon mitigation system or not. So just from my perspective as a buyer, it's just not a great value. It just really decreases the odds that we get our offer accepted, and it's not providing us very much in return. So then beyond the inspection and the radon, the other kind of three things that are common to sweeten the deal and make your offer stand out. So one is going to be appraisal gap coverage. So there's a couple things here where you do have to have extra cash on hand, or at least the ability to move cash from your down payment into an appraisal gap. And it is risky because essentially you're agreeing to pay more than what the bank thinks the property is worth. So this is generally, I would only recommend it on a longer ownership time horizon. So, anything, 3 to 5 years and beyond, it's a little bit safer. If this is a house you're only going to be in for a year or two, that's where I would start to get nervous, with appraisal gap coverage. But essentially the way it works is, again, let's use that $200,000 example. Let's say we got it under contract for $230,000 and the appraisal came back at $220,000. So now there's a $10,000 delta between what the purchase price, what we agreed to pay, and then what the bank is willing to lend, right? And so what we're saying is, let's say we offer, usually you put a number on it, right? You don't want like a limitless appraisal gap that you're willing to cover. So let's say we said we would cover an appraisal gap up to $5,000. So we've got a $10,000 delta between the $220,000 and the $230,000. So what ends up happening is the purchase price moves down to $225,000. The bank is only going to loan on $220,000, and then you're going to cover that $5,000 difference in cash. Now, if you have a large down payment, let's say you were putting $50,000 down. So your initial offer, we were buying it for $230,000. And we were financing $180,000, right? So the bank was going to lend us $180,000, and then we were going to put $50,000 down to come up with a purchase price of $230,000. So what we can do is we can just move the $5,000 from the down payment into the appraisal gap contingency. So now the price is going to get reduced to $225,000, right? And then we're going to put $45,000 down, right? So that's going to be, math is hard, right? We're at, what did I say, $225,000, and we're putting $45,000 down. Just don't want to sound too dumb here. Okay, so we're financing $180,000, right? We're still financing $180,000, but we're only putting $45,000 down, and then we're adding a $5,000 cash payment at closing to the seller. So your cash out of pocket hasn't changed. It's still $50,000 total cash out of pocket. We just moved $5,000 of it from the down payment into that appraisal gap contingency. So if you have a large down payment, this is a relatively low risk way of making your offer better. Now, if you're putting the minimum down and you're emptying the piggy bank to buy this house, this is an extremely risky proposition. And a lot of times sellers are going to want to see that you actually have the cash to cover the appraisal gap. So where normally a proof of funds is only required for a cash purchase, in this case, if you're offering an appraisal gap, often the sellers will require a proof of funds that you actually can cover an appraisal gap should it come up. So if you have a large down payment and all you're doing is moving the money around, that to me is a relatively low risk. If you're really, using your last dime on this home purchase and you're putting the minimum down, that can be quite risky. So then, in addition to appraisal gap coverage, we can also say that we'll accept the existing survey with an affidavit of no change. So the standard Syracuse contract says that the sellers are going to pay for an updated survey. That's going to be like $850 to $1,000. And so by us saying we're going to take the existing survey, that is going to save them $1,000. So it's like we're offering them $1,000 more without it affecting our cash to close or our down payment or anything like that. It makes our offer better without us having to pay any more money. And it actually kills two birds, because in addition to doing that, right now surveys are being scheduled like 30 to 45 days out. So there's a lot of deals I have that are being held up just because we're waiting on the surveyor to get out there and do the survey. So by accepting the existing survey, A, we're sweetening the deal for the seller, but then B, we're just speeding up the timeline here, and it's just one less thing that can go wrong. Now, this requires that the seller still has the existing survey, and that nothing has changed. If they've put up a shed or a fence or subdivided the lot or something like that, then this isn't going to work. We do need an updated survey there. But if they can give us the updated survey and sign an affidavit that nothing is different, this can be a good way to make the deal a little bit stronger from the seller's perspective without costing you any money, and it can speed up the closing timeline. And then speaking of the closing timeline, that would be the last thing that we can do that can sweeten the deal. So if if you are able to have a flexible closing timeline. Some sellers are going to want to close as soon as possible. Some sellers are buying another house and they need that to close first. There's a lot of different situations that the sellers could be in. If you have the flexibility to say, you know what, whatever's good for you is good for me, that can be something that'll differentiate you from other people who need to move in by a certain date. Now, if your lease is up at the end of January or something like that, then you don't have this ability, and so we don't include that. But these would be all the things that we can include if it's available and if it's something you're comfortable with. Now, something that I get asked all the time is, well, let's put in a personal note. Tell the sellers a little bit about us. That's a fair housing violation, so we can't do that. But that's one that comes up all the time. Is let's write a little introduction to our family. But yeah, so we can't do that. That's an old school one, but doesn't work anymore. So, kind of in summary, if we were going to nail this first strategy, like the best possible way to do this strategy, it would be, we're offering asking price. We have an escalation clause, and then we are waiving the inspection, waiving the radon. We're offering an appraisal gap coverage of some amount. We're taking the existing survey with an affidavit of no change, and we have a flexible closing timeline. So now, obviously, you may not be able to nail all of those items, and both your comfort level and your specific living situation are going to prevent you from necessarily doing all of those. But if we were going to nail the absolute best version of it, of this offer strategy, it would be that. And then we just have to change it based on your situation. So then strategy number 2, so this is the one that I've had just a ton of luck with recently. It is a little bit higher risk, higher reward, and there's a few things that, it's a very specific situation that you can employ this. So it only works if you are the first offer. And ideally, you're offering on the very first day that it's listed, maybe the second day. But essentially, you want to be one of the first people to see this house, and you want to write that offer immediately. So that means we have to have the ability to move quickly. So our pre-approval letter has to be good to go. We have to have already talked about what contingencies that we're going to need. We have to have your lawyer picked out. Like essentially, we just, we go see the house, we decide on what the offer is going to be, and then I write it up, you sign it, we send it in. We have to be, able to move that fast. And then the other thing is we do want to be confident that there is going to be a bidding war. You don't want to employ this strategy if you were going to be the only offer. Now, this is usually pretty easy to figure out. If we're talking about a $220,000 house in Liverpool, yeah, there's just going to be multiple offers on it, as long as it's a decent house. So sometimes it's very easy to tell whether it's going to be a multiple offer situation. But this you would only employ in a situation where you are confident it's going to be a multiple offer situation if you let it get there. And then the other thing is you really have to be willing to waive the inspection and the radon and just, really reduce the contingencies as much as possible. And again, it's for that reason we talked about earlier, where during the inspection period, everyone's just on ice, right? So like technically we're under contract. They're no longer soliciting offers. No one else is seeing the house, but the deal could still fall apart. So that's where no seller is going to accept this strategy of offer with a home inspection because they'll just wait for other showings to come in and other offers to come in. So the way this works is what we're going to do is we're going to offer over asking price with as few contingencies as possible, but we're going to timestamp the sellers and say, we need a reply to this offer, by, again, depends on when you send it in, but by 8 p.m. tonight or 10 a.m. tomorrow or noon tomorrow or something like that. But we're timestamping them and saying this offer expires at 8 p.m. tonight. We need an answer by then, but we're giving you an offer you can feel really good about. So the magic number here for how much above asking you need to offer depends a little bit on the purchase price, but it's between $10,000 and $20,000. So, obviously on a $2 million house, $20,000 is not gonna move the needle. But on on house prices more typical in Central New York, if you've got a $220,000 house, if you show them $230,000, $235,000, or $240,000 and say, hey, I'm giving you above asking, I've waived the inspection, I've got solid financing, I'm ready to go, just accept this offer by 8 p.m. tonight, and boom, we're off and running. That can be something where if you had let it get to a bidding war, that $240,000 may have turned into $250,000, $260,000, $265,000. So the idea here is we get it locked up for $240,000 before we've gotten an opportunity for other buyers to come in and turn it into a bidding war. The sellers get to walk away happy because they go, look, maybe we thought it was going to go for a little bit more, but we got this locked in at a price that we're comfortable with. So it's kind of an everybody wins situation. Now, the downside would be some sellers will feel like you're bullying them by timestamping the offer. And that's a little bit true. Now, I feel it's being offset by the fact that you are offering them good terms and a good price. But some sellers will be turned off by this, and they will just kind of say, screw these guys, I'm not working with them no matter what. And so then if they decline the offer and you go to resubmit, They may just say like, you know what, these guys, they left a bad taste in my mouth. I'm not interested in working with them. So I'm going to pick another offer. So that's kind of the downside is depending on the seller. And, we don't know anything about the sellers. So we're just kind of guessing at their temperament and how they will take it. And it also kind of depends on how the list agent presents it. If the list agent says, God, I hate when people do this. This is so freaking annoying, but we got to make a decision by 8 p.m. That's going to be different than if the list agent says like, wow, hey, we got 20 over asking, they're waiving the inspection. We just got to sign this right now. And these are things we don't have control over. We don't have control over the seller's temperament, and we don't have control over how the list agent presents the offer. So some of it's just out of our hands, but this is an offer strategy that I've had a lot of luck with recently. I've gotten quite a few buyers under contract at really competitive prices by employing this strategy. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions.